Back in 2016, there was just a lot of talk about impact investment in conservation causes and public benefit corporations. And I felt that what we were proposing to do would have no trouble attracting all of this impact investment. And so again, I just saw this as I'm going to hire an experienced maltster, and then all these impact investors are going to come in, and I'll be sitting back here and I'll be, a retired guy that's working 24 hours a week on this, and it'll all be nice, and I'll still do lots of river running and things like that. The aha moment, which again I would not say aha, but was like, you know what, Chip, you're the impact investor because your project isn't big enough at this point in time for these folks, and there isn't going to be this magical experienced maltster that's going to show up that can do this, and which just meant that, and I still am, it's working 7 days a week on this. So that was the aha moment. And then that was a point, it's like, so do I really want to do that? And then I just thought, yeah, I do.
The aha moment for me, at least, was he actually came over and he sat down in my backyard one day and said, I think we're actually going to have to build this thing. That was the aha moment. But to me, it was very exciting. It was like, okay, now what do we do? I took an interest because I had some, what they call friends, family, and fools that were willing to invest in a crazy idea and help us get started. So that was pretty much my aha moment, my way of getting involved in it from the very beginning. And Chip was gracious enough to make me a shareholder in the business and be part of the board, and here we are today. Chip uses the term a thought partner. From the very beginning when we conceived this idea, we would brew on my patio, brew beer, and talk about what we needed to do. We talked a little bit about malt. I have a background in history of the Verde Valley, and Chip had asked if this was a successful crop here, and it had been. Barley was planted in the Verde Valley with the very first settlers in 1865. The very first farm in Camp Verde produced corn and barley as feed for the military in Prescott, at Fort Whipple. One of the great side benefits of Sinagua Malt is because it's an agricultural-based business, and because the Verde Valley's real true history is based on agriculture, because of the plentiful supply of water and streams here that allowed for the irrigation ditches to be dug here and all the farming to take place early on, it's just a natural fit.
I was in a family construction business, and the last decade I was in it, all I did were water and wastewater treatment facilities. That's where I really learned a lot about automated process equipment and everything that goes into it with control panels, and how to achieve a certain outcome with that equipment, and then how to modify things and adapt things. And with Steve Ayers being a master home brewer, I learned a lot about what outcomes we're looking for and what a brewer would be looking for in what they would value the most in the finished product. But I really got to say, the first couple years of this, I didn't know. It was really learning by doing. We threw away a lot of batches of malt that first year as we learned how to use this technology that we have to make good malt. I didn't have a mentor, but we're still here. We've learned a lot by doing.
Well, I came in and I saw the place, and Chip gave me an interview and I liked it, so he hired me. And before this, I was working on a ranch in Oregon, and I had some agricultural background, like growing like tomatoes and stuff.
I was a welder by trade, and I've done various other things have kind of come into play. Or I've worked with HVAC, and so I know a little bit about cooling systems, and I've done some welding here. So I mean that's all come in a bit. I was in network administrator, which was what I was going to school for, which hasn't really come into play too much here, other than the graphical user interface system. But it's all a little bit has come into play.
I have looked at my responsibility from the very beginning to assist Chip with finding investment money. I still keep a full-time job. I work as the economic development director for the town of Camp Verde. So that's my day job. But I have weekends and evenings to do some other stuff, and so squeeze in that and pretty much answer the call when Chip needs some help with something or another. That's been my role.
Sinagua Malt buys grain from local farmers, and they're all here within probably 5 miles, at least within 10 miles of this malting facility, and also with the new malting facility that we're going to break ground on the first of the year, which is 1,000 feet from here. So it's all very local. They plant in January, harvest their grain in June, and then that grain is usually ready, I'd say 8 weeks after harvest. And we transport that grain to this facility, and we process that grain, and the process is called malting. And basically what that means is we nurture this grain through a bunch of manufacturing processes to simulate optimum conditions in nature for this grain. If it were in nature, it would be the conditions that would result in it putting down a root and putting up a sprout. Inside that grain, it's called endosperm, but it's the equivalent of a placenta in a human. And it's everything to keep that grain going until the plant is performing photosynthesis and the roots are bringing up nutrients. Well, it just happens that all that potential energy that the plant needs is also the potential energy that a craft brewer or distiller or a bakery would want, in an artisan bakery would want in that kernel of grain.
When the grain comes to us from the farm, we're just sort of filtering everything out with the first clean, getting the sticks and the chaff out. It needs to look roughly how it does now before it goes into the steep vessel. We'll skim the top of the steep vessel afterwards to get a little bit more stuff out, but we want it pretty clean before it goes in there. And then the same machine gets used again after it comes out of the malt vessel. So we do one last clean that kind of removes dust and anything that we missed the first time, so that it goes out to the brewers. It's a good product.
The first step in our operation is called steeping, and that's where we put the grain in our steeping vessel. It's there for a day and a half to 2 days, and it's a series of submerging it and then letting it dry. And basically our grain is drier than most grains because of where we are. We're in Arizona. So we'll bring that grain in. It'll be about 10% moisture content. And when it comes out of the steeping process, it'll be about 45% moisture content. And it also will have a little rootlet sticking out of one end. It's called chitting, but that's that first thing that happens with the grain, and that kind of simulates, during the period of snow melt or, a heavier moisture for a kernel of grain. And also some internal modification is started. Then we transfer it to the germination kiln vessel. It's germinating for 4 days, and we keep it at around 65 degrees Fahrenheit and 99–100% relative humidity. And again, those are just optimal growing conditions that this grain would find in nature. And then when there's a lot of modification occurs, development of amino acids, and when we hit that optimal condition right there, That's when we stop nurturing. That's when the germination process is done, and then we kiln. And that takes about 2 days. We start off with our drying at about 120 degrees Fahrenheit and until the grain moisture's down to less than 20%. And then we'll start ramping up our heat. We'll finish it off at about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. When we get that grain moisture down to 4 or 5%, then it's done. Then we'll do a final cleaning of the finished malt, and then we package it.
The end of the week, like Wednesday through Friday, we start cleaning malt on this machine right here. And then we're bagging it, stacking on the pallets, and wrapping them up, getting them ready to ship out. Beginning of the week, we transfer the malt. Well, first we unload the malt vessel, then we transfer the barley from the steep into the malt vessel after we clean that. Yeah, a lot of weighing on the scales and just getting it ready to go out the door.
It's different every day. Monday, we just sort of run through the process. We load the steep vessel, unload the steep vessel, load it into the malting vessel, and then that will go through the process that Chip already described. And come the next week on Monday, we'll unload that, taking moisture samples and cleaning the grain, cleaning it before it goes into the steep, cleaning it after it comes out of the malt vessel, sort of ensuring that every step along the way the product hits all the marks that it's supposed to.
We've logged every batch we've done since the beginning, and we know what the outcomes are. So when we get wetter climate, drier climate, hotter climate, colder climate, we basically know how to adapt to that. Barley cultivars we use nowadays are far better in terms of yield and adaptation to different climates than what we originally started with some European cultivars. The whole malting process, there's a lot of science, a lot of research has gone into that and continues to go into it. Technology, what we work with every day is automated process equipment. And I mean, this is just an excellent example of how you can take a farm product, but then through the use of modern technology, you can process that. Whereas 500 years ago, they basically were malting grain on the floor of a barn to do this processing.
There's not a craft malting operation in the state of Arizona, and there's barely but a few dozen in the United States altogether. There's 5,000 plus breweries, but there's only a handful of malters. Chip and I are beer enthusiasts, but Sinagua Malt was because of both of ours passion for the Verde River. I was a journalist, I met Chip. I was fascinated by the work that he was doing and what he had done, how he had kind of changed the face of conservation in the Verde Valley. And always kind of wanted to be a part of that. It wasn't always my career. My career was either to write about it, and then when I became an economic developer, I saw an opportunity there to fundamentally change the way you do economic development. Businesses like what is being created here are, I think they're sort of just the beginning of a wave that we'll see more of in the future. And hopefully we see more of in the future.
This really started with the Nature Conservancy looking throughout the Colorado River Basin at ways to improve irrigation efficiencies, ways to do sustainable regenerative farming. And one of the strategies that they came up with was crop conversion. In other words, converting from crops like alfalfa or corn that use more water, but also they use their water during the summer when that's when the highest demand is on rivers and streams and the lowest supply. You know, the snow runoff is gone. And so converting to a crop that overall has a lower consumptive use, but also a crop that uses its, in this area, and this is the great thing about here, is it uses its water in the late winter and the spring. And you know, barley is harvested, malting barley is harvested about the third week of June, which is a very dry month. It doesn't use any water after Memorial Day, and it doesn't use any water for the rest of the summer. So that seasonal shift is probably more important in keeping summer flows, improving summer flows. The Nature Conservancy is a huge part of all of this. You know, we work closely with them on the supply side.
There's a number of ways to do water conservation. You can use less water in your home and in your appliances in your life, and you can take shorter showers, and you can use different kinds of water fixtures and things like that. But the largest consumptive use of water out there, especially in rivers, streams, and aquifers, is agriculture. So if you can make a dent in the way agriculture uses water and find better ways to make it work for the farmer, you're gonna make a much more, I think, a much larger impact, in the sense that Sinagua Malt is trying an experiment that, frankly, nobody's tried. So in doing that, we're hopefully going to open doors for others to look like, you know what, if we collaboratively as partners, all the way from the farmer to the investor, to the brewer, to the beer drinker, it takes all of them to make it work. It takes a huge investment to make these kind of things work. It's remained our biggest obstacle. We've been very fortunate to recently have someone who has taken an interest in this, who comes from a corporate world where he's just tired of the corporate world, and has chosen to take some of the wealth that he's created and do something responsible with it. It's a chain of people who frankly care to make it work.
The malting operation, you know, it's a link between the agricultural community and the end users, which are the craft brewers, craft distillers, artisan bakers that want to do this. You know, in fact, Yavapai College now has a craft brewing program. So there's jobs there, and all this stuff ties together, you know, this whole supply chain and demand and the public benefit part of it. It's important to me when I look at this, I don't just look at us, but I look at the whole supply chain and the end users, and in the end, it's the patron at the brewery. As we learn this process and develop, it's more like, here's what we can get the most bang for our buck. And again, we're looking at what can we do to get us to where we are now, to where we will expand and make more different malts and have a much broader client base.
Our current clientele is in northern Arizona. It's in Phoenix. There's brewers in Tucson that have used our stuff, and we've also been distributing it through homebrew stores, which I think is a really untapped market out there, because it's produced here locally. We don't have the shipping costs of bringing it in from one of the big brewers. So I know as a home brewer, we can compete straight up with anybody else buying two-row malt. So getting it out into the home brewing community, I think, is something that we'll probably work to expand on. There'll be a huge market, but it is one that I think helps spread the message of who Sinagua Malt is.
The malt we sell is a pale malt. It's a base malt in terms of the barley malt. So it's really just about quantity. We kept it simple. We're just doing one product in terms of the barley malt right now. The wheat malt can be used for a couple of different things. You can actually make a wheat beer with it, but a lot of brewers use some wheat in all of their beers because of different attributes they'll want in that beer.
It's a science. Brewing is a science in a very pure sense. It started out with people just doing it in their backyard, and they really didn't understand what was going on. Yeast was called God is good for so many years because they had no idea what it was. All they knew is if they took a little bit of the beer that they made last time and they added it to the beer this time, that it would duplicate itself. Well, that's because the yeast they were using was reproducing itself back into the next batch of beer. Brewers, when they make a beer, don't just use, it's called base malt because it's the primary malt in it. So 80% of the grain bill in a beer or higher is typically this pale malt, and it produces the sugars in the recipe that the yeast feeds off of. But what makes each beer so individual, whether it's an amber beer or whether it's a stout or a porter, is a combination of other malts. This machine behind me is capable of making most of those malts. We haven't done it because our primary goal has been to produce two-row base malt for the industry. It's the bulk of what people would buy, and it helps us convert more farmland, quite frankly. But I think anybody who's of age should, if you have an interest in that, learn how to make some beer and understand the process of what actually gets you to that wonderful concoction in the bottle. It's like the brewing by the seat of your pants. Nowadays you can buy machines that you can they're all computer generated. They can you push the buttons and it'll duplicate the recipe for you. The math skills that used to be required when I first started brewing were enormous. So in order to calculate, for instance, that if I had, let's just say I had 14 pounds of grain and I was adding it to a bucket of water, and I wanted to know exactly what the temperature of what that water that I applied to the grain needed to be in order to set the grain at a mashing temperature of 150 degrees, that's a pretty complicated mathematical equation. Nowadays there's software where you can go in and plug those things in and it'll do the math for it. But when I first started out, if you wanted to really learn how to brew, you had to sit down and do the math on each one of those. So it's simplified itself a little bit from that standpoint. Craft brewers are already challenged right now by the fact that they have higher production costs than the larger craft malters. I can tell you that where Chip may be very reluctant to apply the art side to what we're doing here, but this is large batches and a production facility with it. But when you're brewing beer, just the art of it sometimes is the fun.
So I'm going to be looking for certain attributes. People that have really strong computer skills, know how to work with a lot of different softwares, and folks that have strong mechanical aptitude are the kind of folks I'd be looking at there. But I will say that the folks that I'm going to be looking for are going to want to do this because of the public benefit and the sustainability part of it. Those are the kind of people I hope to attract, the kind of work culture that I'd like to have. Equipment maintenance is going to be a huge thing. The actual malting, you're going to have really strong mechanical aptitude, and a science background would help. Just that scientific method of how you approach. I mean, it's one thing to understand the science, but then the technology that goes with it. You have to understand, you know, fan motors and indirect air heaters and chillers and so many things that people go to trade school for, to really know how to keep them running, but also to know, you know, now that I'm better educated on this, is this the right fan motor for us? Is this the right chiller? And then you get into programming, like we have a pretty sophisticated user interface display on our control panel, and just writing the software for that, modifying the software, changing your recipes. You need a lot of background in computer technology.
There'll be a lot of training involved in it, but I think we'll be able to attract some very bright and enthusiastic people to it. And I think that makes our life a little bit easier, as opposed to if I was just running a different kind of business, because of what we're doing. And where we're going to find them? I think they're going to find us.
A year from now, we should reach an expansion that will have more staff. But I think sales and marketing, when I say marketing, I just don't mean sales marketing. I mean marketing our purpose and our brand. Why are we doing this?
There's a lot of different aspects to this job, and I think they're all pretty cool, but it's coming to work every morning and knowing that we've kind of got a bigger mission in mind that makes it different than any job I've ever had. So I think that's probably my favorite part.
Well, I like what we do with conserving the water in the Verde River, and I like beer. I like driving the forklift too, of course.
It's a lot of just working with your hands and knowing, you know, various tools, and you're working with so many different things, and you kind of got to be able to pick up a book and learn a little bit about the process and learn the terminology and the verbiage to know what you're doing.
From top to bottom, you have to know applied technology to be successful. Take the science part and just keeping up with the malting and all the educational stuff that's going on with that, so that we're current with the science of malting. Mathematics is a really big part of what we do. I mean, it just goes into everything that we do, whether it's shipping and receiving, keeping track of the weights of things, keeping track of moisture. You know, mathematics comes into play in just about everything that we do. And also drill down a little bit on the technology. I'm referring to the automated technology. To work in a facility like this, I mean, you need skills, you need to know how to use tools, you need to know how to maintain complex equipment.
I think it's just being able to kind of be able to learn new things when it comes to something like this, because you're doing a little bit of everything when it's a small operation. So you got to kind of learn a little bit of all the different areas, and so I suppose most of the jobs I've worked have played some role at some point here at Sinagua Malt.
Well, because we are limited and we are not a USDA approved facility, we cannot ship outside of Arizona. Now, that doesn't prevent us from shipping to one of our brewers producing beer, and shipping outside of the state of Arizona through their distribution network. I know that Arizona Wilderness, which has been our partner from day one, has done a lot of collaborative beers with other brewers. And some of that has been using Sinagua Malt. They've helped spread the word in that instance. There will be a point, I think, in the not too distant future when we'll be working with some distillers who will want to produce whiskeys and other spirits that will use Sinagua Malt, that will be able to expand that market outward. And I think we need to explore the idea as a malting operation to get USDA certification at some point, so we can do that, to broaden our own market. The expansion we have in mind is a fairly substantial chunk of the amount of base malt used in the craft brewing industry. So to move all that malt and get to the highest and best use of what we've bought all this equipment for, we're going to have to expand that market in several different directions and not be just focused on all the small craft brewers in the state of Arizona, although they will be our core constituents, I believe, now and always into the future.
Chip talked a little bit about how these are a vertical machine, and we're, as we move forward, they're going to be horizontal machines. It kind of changes a little bit of everything. So I'm really excited about learning how that all works and the differences there, and how that produces our final product, what the differences are, and what's easier, what's harder, what's new to learn.
So as a craft malter, having that story of what it is and what we do and why we do what we do, I think is going to be important to help market that. And I think these kind of river conservation, crop conversion type of businesses and operations have a real future down the road.
The malting process is both science and technology, but not for every position, but I would say in general. And the mathematics and the artisan part makes me nervous, but without that, I don't think we would be where we are right now. I think that artisan approach, that entrepreneurism, you know, thinking a little outside the box, we wouldn't be here without that. The whole idea of how do you get businesses engaged, and how do you work with agricultural producers that want to still be farming on their land 100 years from now. I think there's a bit of an art to all of that.
I I couldn't draw a stick figure, and I still can't, and I'll be the first to tell you that. Nor can I run the cameras that are behind you. I can tell you this though, I get my art kick out of brewing beers and making some very, very good beers. And I only drink my own stuff pretty much because of that. Picky after a while. STEAM and STEM are both things that are applicable everywhere, so it's limited to your imagination.